Hey guys, it's Michael, and in this video I'll be showing you how to value a stock with a simple three-factor method, walking through an example with my valuation model. I'll walk you through how to apply this method yourself when looking at an individual stock, so you'll be able to determine what your likely expected return is in different scenarios, which can help you develop a more informed buying strategy to hopefully limit your losses and improve your long-term returns. What I like about this method in particular is that each of the three factors are intuitive and easy to understand. So with that being said, let's jump in, and if you're new here, be sure to subscribe for more investment content like this in the future. We'll be doing a portfolio reveal at 50,000 subscribers, so look forward to that. So behind me is the Value Seeker discounted earnings model that I'll be using throughout this video to demonstrate the valuation process and its results. For reference, that's available in the second link in the description below within the spreadsheet library labeled valuation. So zooming in a bit, this valuation model is filled out with information from a stock I've been looking at over the past several months, and one that's actually within my portfolio, and that's Cigna Corporation. And I'm going to relatively briefly walk through this model with Cigna so you can get a sense of the three factors that make up the valuation model, how each of them work and impact the future returns from the stock, as well as get a handle of the model and its features. But before we get into the numbers, to take a step back, when you're investing and buying a stock over the long term, your returns or the money you will make from investing in that stock will come from two components. The first are dividends or cash distributions that are paid out directly to shareholders. And second is share price appreciation, also called capital appreciation, when the value of your shares rises over time. If you decide to sell your shares in the future where the stock price is above what you paid for it, that capital gain from the sale of your stock, combined with all the dividends you received while holding the stock, make up your total return. This graph to my left represents the modeled share price and accumulated dividends for the stock that you're modeling. In the case of Cigna, it pays a very nominal dividend, so most of the return you'll be getting from investing in Cigna stock is through share price or capital appreciation. However, as for capital appreciation, what's actually going on behind the scenes is that there are two specific factors that are really driving the change in share price. One of those factors is how much earnings or profit a company generates, specifically the rate at or how fast those earnings are growing over time. The other factor is called valuation, and it's a relative metric of how much other investors are willing to pay for an ownership right of the company's earnings. For instance, one metric of valuation is how much investors are willing to pay for $1 of the company's earnings. By combining these three factors together, you can get a fairly accurate picture of the expected future returns from a stock. So using the base case model assumptions for Cigna, we can actually model how much of our expected return is coming from each of those three factors. That's what this graph does here, and starts with a principal of $1,000 or $1,000 invested into the stock. And if those assumptions hold true, you can get a general sense of where your return is coming from over the long term when you're investing in a stock. In the case of Cigna, since it doesn't really pay a dividend, you're not getting any return from the dividend, and most of that return is actually coming in the form of earnings growth, or the company growing their earnings per share over time. A small portion of that share price appreciation comes from valuation change, which is the shares becoming more richly valued, or investors would be willing to pay more for the same amount of earnings at some point in the future. This can happen if a stock's valuation is temporarily undervalued due to short-term concerns over the stock and company, but over the long term would be expected to trade at a higher, more normal level of valuation. I know that's a lot of information, but let's quickly walk through the assumptions that we'll be looking at and inputting into this model, and then we'll take a look at a fresh, brand new example with a new stock, and I'll show you step by step how you can find this information, apply this within your own model yourself, and use that to help get an estimate of the stock's value and potential buying points. So aside from the stock ticker symbol, what you'll be inputting into the model is the expected earnings growth rate over the next 10 years. Now, earnings might not grow at a consistent rate, so you can stage this as a two-stage model, for instance, to have the earnings slow down starting in a given year. Another input we'll be looking for is the current annual earnings per share that the company is generating, as well as any expected reduction in share count if the company is engaged in a current share repurchase program when they're buying shares from the market and reducing their public share count. In addition to that, you'll input the current dividend yield, as well as the dividend payout ratio change rate, or if you believe the company will start paying out a greater portion of their earnings in the form of dividends over time. The required rate of return or discount rate is the annualized rate of return that you're targeting from your investment. The higher you set this value, the lower the price you need to buy the stock at to achieve that desired level of return. If you have a lower rate of return, you don't need to buy the stock as cheaply in order to satisfy that return. And finally, the last input is the expected price to earnings ratio for the stock in 10 years. Typically, I'd recommend being more conservative with this value because this will be the sole value that determines how much of a factor valuation plays in your future returns. With that, you can select 3 different scenarios, and in this case, for the base case scenario, we can get a fair valuation return for Cigna Corporation at a 12% annualized rate of return at about $169. Now, Cigna is currently trading above that, but it wasn't too long ago that Cigna was actually trading below this fair valuation price at around $155. So based on this current valuation and accepting a 12% rate of return, there isn't any margin of safety at this price. In fact, it would be, relatively speaking, about 20% overvalued. However, if you're willing to accept a lower rate of return, you can actually modify the required rate of return or discount rate to see approximately what is the expected return from Cigna Corporation at this current price. You can play around with it, but it looks like at around a 10% rate of return, we get a fair valuation for Cigna of roughly $203, which is fairly close to the $202 it's trading at now. This means if you buy Cigna at its current price, and the assumptions in the model hold true, you can expect to see a roughly 10% annual return over the next 10 years. Almost all of that return will be driven by earnings growth in the company, and a small portion that will detract from your return is a slightly lower valuation over time. So there's some other stuff in the model, but I want to go through a new, fresh example, this time with a different stock, and we'll be actually looking at Home Depot, which was a request of someone in my private investor group. So with this, I'll show you step by step, generally how you can find and estimate this information to get a rough sense of the assumptions you can use for your model, which you then can adjust or tweak as you see fit. So what I'm actually going to start off with is the current annual earnings per share, because this one is relatively straightforward, though there are a few nuances. So if you do a quick search for Home Depot earnings, one of the results that comes up is from Nasdaq.com. There's others you can use, but I find this one is relatively straightforward and provides most of the information I need. So from here, it provides the last 4 quarters of earnings. So if you take the sum or add all these 4 numbers up, you'll get the most recent annual earnings per share. This is all the earnings the company generated per share over the last 12 months. So we add all that up and we get $10.22. Now, one thing I should note here is that sometimes companies will report adjusted earnings per share rather than what's called GAAP accounting earnings per share. So there may be a difference between those two. Sometimes these adjusted earnings per share numbers exclude one-time negative costs that they don't expect to be repeated in future quarters. It's up to your own discretion to decide which one to use, but if you want to be conservative, you can always take the earnings per share reported and slightly reduce that level within the model. In this case, I'm just going to stick with the 1022 we have here. Next, we'll go back up in the model and look at the projected earnings growth rate over the next 10 years. Unlike past data where you know exactly what the earnings are, earnings growth rates are simply predictions about the future, so there's no exact science into determining exactly what these values should be. That's why this model allows you to plug in 3 different scenarios, so you can test out the valuation of the stock in 3 different sets of earnings growth rates. So let's just say, for starting with a base case, how do you go about it determining the initial estimates here? Well, there are several resources you can use, but I'll just point you to a couple of them that might help guide the process for assumption setting. One of them is seekingalpha.com, and you can look up each individual stock. In this case, we're looking at Home Depot, and get some information about key summary statistics and metrics on the stock. In this case, since we're looking for earnings growth, we'll be looking at this growth tab to get a sense of current and past growth rates. Scrolling down a bit, we can see the compounded annual growth rates for earnings per share, and you always want to look at the diluted earnings per share because that's most accurate and representative to true shareholders. So in this case, earnings were up about 10% year over year. Over the last 3 years, it was an annualized growth rate of about 18%, and since the Great Recession, an annualized growth rate of 22%. Now, especially these higher growth rates, these started from a much lower base of earnings, especially in the Great Recession when earnings were at a cyclical low, so I wouldn't expect earnings growth to be this high in the future. Perhaps projecting this 10% growth rate out into the future, and then lowering that to a more terminal growth rate could potentially be an option. If we scroll back up and click on earnings, and then scroll down a little bit to analyst expectations, we can get a rough sense of generally what analysts are expecting the earnings to be for a stock in the next year. In this case, on average, it looks like about a 10% growth rate is in line with current analyst expectations, at least for the next year. Another website you can use is one called Macro Trends. This is a free website that provides data on historical earnings and revenue, as well as other financial metrics for many stocks and companies. So from this, in the top of the 3 graphs, we can see that the trailing 12 months earnings have been increasing very steadily since the Great Recession, grew at a very fast rate during 2018, but it since have slowed the growth rate significantly in 2019. Taking a look at earnings per share, it's a similar picture with the growth rate slowing down fairly significantly in 2019. Part of the reason Home Depot's been able to drive such consistent earnings per share consistently repurchase shares of their stock to reduce the public share count. This means for remaining shareholders in the company, you get a relatively larger slice of the company's earnings because it's split across fewer shares. In this case, Home Depot appears to be buying back shares at least over the last 3 or 4 years, a rate of about 4% of the share count per year. In addition, when informing your decision, you can also take a look at management comments and potentially earnings guidance in each quarterly earnings release. Guidance just being predictions or expectations on how they see the business performing in the short term. In this case, for a base case, what I'm going to do is just start off with a 10% earnings growth rate, and I'll apply that for the next 3 years, and starting in year 4, for conservatism, and since Home Depot will be sensitive to any economic downturns, I'll lower that growth rate for the remaining 7 years in the model to 7% per year. As we saw earlier from the share count reduction, we'll assume that Home Depot still continues to buy back around 4% of the share count per year. From this, we now have a calculated 10-year annualized earnings growth rate, or on average over the 10 years, how much we expect the earnings of the company to grow. Notice that the average 10-year earnings per share growth rate is actually higher at 9.2% instead of 7.9%, and that's due to the impact of the share reduction or share buybacks that are reducing the share count over time. So now the next piece in the model is looking up the current annual dividend. And that's fairly straightforward. With a Google search, you can type the name of the stock and dividends. And NASDAQ.com, again, is a good resource for this. Or you can also pull it directly from the investor relations website of the company of the stock you're looking at. In this case, we can see that Home Depot has paid a quarterly dividend of $1.36, and that equates to an annualized dividend payout of $5.44. Automatically calculated by the model is the current annual dividend yield, as well as the current dividend payout ratio, or what percentage of earnings the company pays out in the form of cash dividends to shareholders. The dividend payout ratio change is how much you expect the proportion of earnings paid out in dividends to increase or decrease over time. This usually won't have that much of a significant effect on the model. In this case, I'm just going to keep it at 0. What you could though do is look up the historical earnings as well as the historical dividends paid out per share and calculate for yourself how the payout ratio has changed over time and if there's a trend towards increasing the payout ratio and providing more capital back to shareholders in the form of dividends. Again though, for this model, I'll be keeping this at 0, meaning the dividend payout ratio will remain roughly at 53%. This means with a constant payout ratio, since the earnings of the company are increasing, the calculated dividends in the model are also increasing as well, and they are increasing at the rate of earnings growth. Again, the required rate of return or discount rate is the rate that you're targeting as an annual rate of return for your investment in a stock. In this case, I'll be starting out with 12% because this is generally the target that I use for many of the stocks that I look at for my own individual portfolio, at least when building an initial position. And finally, our last assumption is the expected price to earnings ratio at the end of 10 years. For this, a helpful resource again is going back to macro trends and taking a look at the price ratios and then the price to earnings ratio over time. On the top, we have the stock price. On the middle, we have the trailing 12 months earnings per share. And on the bottom, we have the price to earnings ratio. Now keep in mind, depending on what earnings data are used by macro trends, these might vary differently from other services like Yahoo Finance or other websites you might look up the PE ratio. Generally, for most services online, the stock price that they'll be using in the price to earnings ratio will be the same, but it's that earnings data that they're using that can cause the variance in price to earnings ratios you can see on different websites. So take these ratios with a grain of salt, but right now what I'm looking most for is a trend in price to earnings ratios and the range of historical price to earnings ratios that company usually trades at. Prior to the financial crisis, when Home Depot's earnings were declining, the price to earnings ratio was relatively low, trading between 10 and 11. Since then, over the last decade, the price to earnings ratio has gradually increased over time and is now trading at historically high ranges. What I can tell from this information is that it's likely that some point in the future, Home Depot's price to earnings ratio will revert back to a lower level, especially if we see any economic slowdown in the future. Part of the reason why Home Depot's multiple has likely expanded so much during this time is due not only to its strong and consistent history of earnings growth since the Great Recession, but also to the low interest rate environment, which generally has pushed the price to earnings multiples on most stocks up. If either of those situations change over the next 10 years, which they very well might, then we can expect to see likely a lower price to earnings ratio at some point in the future. Also, as a benchmark, I generally use 15 as a relatively fair price to earnings multiple. Of course, there are companies that are growing at much faster rates of earnings that likely can support a higher price to earnings multiple, but the question you have to ask is 10 years down the road, will they still have the economic moat or competitive advantages to allow them to continue growing at such a fast rate even 10 years from now? This terminal price to earnings ratio does have a significant effect on the model, so this is one of the key variables that you can adjust and see how it impacts the end valuation. So now that we have our inputs in, we can take a look at the actual modeled results. And from a first glance on this chart, you can see the projected share price over time, as well as the value of the reinvested dividends, that's dividends received and then reinvested back into Home Depot stock, and the accumulated value of those shares at the end of 10 years. So in our base case assumptions, here's the results that we have from the model. We have a fair valuation price for a 12% annualized rate of return of $151.42. This is well below the current price of roughly $220, meaning that if these assumptions hold true in the model, then we would need to wait until the price dropped to $151 per share to achieve that 12% rate of return. Keep in mind these assumptions may be fairly conservative, but oftentimes I like to err on the side of caution rather than being too aggressive in my modeling to help avoid potentially buying into a stock too high. However, again, one of the benefits of this model is you can explore those cases where you do see maybe more unfavorable estimates of earnings growth and other assumptions. Also take a look at another set of aggressive or favorable assumptions in the case things go very well for the company. So another way to look at this is that the current price to earnings ratio is about 21.6, and the model is suggesting waiting till a price to earnings ratio of about 15 where it achieves a fair valuation to hit that 12% rate of return. This is based again on the projected earnings per share as well as dividends that the company is expected to pay out in the future, which directly impact the share price over time as well as the value of those reinvested dividends. So from this chart here, we can see hypothetically what a $10,000 investment in Home Depot, specifically at this price of $151 per share, would look like based on the model. In this case, the majority of the money you would make in Home Depot in this scenario would be driven by the growth of earnings in the company. A smaller portion would come from those dividends that are paid over time and then reinvesting those dividends back into the stock, and a very marginal portion would come from a slight increase in valuation. You can look at this in a percentage basis with this graph here, which shows what percent of your return is coming from each factor component at the end of year 10. So you can kind of think about this as about 67% of your investment thesis in the stock, at least based on the model, is coming from earnings growth. Another 32% is coming from the dividend, and about 1% from valuation. So the plus side here is if you're buying Home Depot at 152, you don't have to rely on any valuation increase over that time. Changes in valuation are really fluctuations in market and other investors' sentiment about the stock, which sometimes you can't always count on. Earnings, especially for stable quality companies, are generally more predictable, and you can rely on those returns with a greater degree of certainty. However, nothing is a guarantee, and sometimes there might be periods where earnings are below expectations for a certain period of time. Dividends are generally the most reliable component of an investment return because at least most American companies work very hard to maintain at least their current dividend payment or try to grow that every year. However, there are exceptions where you do see occasional dividend cuts for companies experiencing significant financial stress, like we saw with General Electric and Kraft Heinz. Going back to our model, we can adjust the required rate of return to get an estimate of what the likely future expected return is from Home Depot at this current price by setting our discount rate so that our fair valuation matches roughly the current price of the stock. So through some trial and error, it looks like about a 7.3% annualized rate of return can be roughly expected from these price levels at around $220 per share for Home Depot. When looking at the return component, this continues to model an expected increase in earnings growth over time, as well as that reinvested dividend. However, what's detracting or taking away from some of the potential appreciation in the share price is a decline in that valuation over time, which also can be called price to earnings multiple compression. When you have multiple compression and that multiple decreases over time, investors aren't willing to pay as much for the same dollar of a company's earnings. This is a scenario I could very well see if we see some kind of economic downturn in the future where spending in home construction and home improvement slows down. Overall, I hope that gives you a good rough overview of how you can use and apply a three-factor model to value stocks and the process for finding and analyzing data to use for assumption setting. There's definitely a lot more we can do here, so this won't be the last time we see this spreadsheet, and I'll continue to update this over time to add more functionality. Again, if you're interested, you can check that out in the second link in the description below. Until next time, thank you so much for watching. My name is Michael, and I will see you in the next video.